Okay, it's my great pleasure to welcome Chris Duffy, our speaker for this week. Chris and I go so far back that we can't remember where it was when we got started, which says more about memory loss than anything else, unfortunately. Chris did his undergrad and graduate work at New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology. He actually served 2 tours in Vietnam with the Navy construction battalions, and after that he did his graduate work and then was on the faculty at Utah State University before going to Penn State. And at Penn State and Utah State also, Chris has just done some amazing things. He is some of the active areas that he works in is stability of a 2-state hill slope model, concentration discharge dynamics and watersheds, model analysis of complex groundwater chemistry. Chris is known as the father of the Penn State Integrated Hydrologic Model, PIM, that I know some of you have worked with. Chris is also the lead investigator on the Penn State Critical Zone Observatory at Shale Hill, so one of the first observatories under the NSF-sponsored CZO program, and Chris has definitely been a leader in that, and I probably got to know him much better visiting his observatory a few years ago. And as you can see, Chris is going to be talking about some exciting things today, and this question about aging with isotopes, which doesn't appear anywhere on his CV. So he continues to break new ground continuously. So Chris, we're real pleased to have you here.
Oh. Thanks, Richard. Thanks. It's nice to be back in Oregon, especially given this beautiful weather you guys are having. So today what I want to do is tell you a little bit about our CZO. I know that you've got one, and we're rooting for you at Penn State that you guys will get your CZO out here as well. And tell you a little bit about what we did over the last 5 years. I was the PI for the first 5, and now Sue Brantley is going to be the PI for the renewal, provided that we're successful. But it's been a really fun project, and I want to tell you some things about it. And along the way, I want to talk about an experimental project, but also a theoretical side, the modeling side of how we're looking at stable isotopes of oxygen-18 and deuterium as a measure of the age of water, the residence time, flow path, and those sorts of things. And I'll get to that as we move along. So in our CZO, we had a lot of folks that contributed either most of it's in kind because there wasn't enough money in these things to fund everybody, but we had a lot of folks that were participating. These are most of them, or some of them, not most of them maybe. So we had a lot of agents. The CZEN is one of the organizations self-organizing, the Critical Zone Environmental Network, the Quasi, the Community Land Surface Dynamics Group, CSDMS, have all made some nice contributions. NSF, of course, has been our patron in this whole effort. All right, so what are we doing at Shale Hills? So Shale Hills is a dot on the map. Our idea was to go to one location in the first few years and measure the hell out of it. And it serves as we wanted this site to serve as a sort of initial platform to where geochemists, geomorphologists, hydrologists, ecologists, and climate scientists and others could all overlap their experiments, and so we could learn from each other. That was really the motivating force to starting so small, but we also realized that this small watershed, first order channel, sits in a larger domain which has to be treated, and that's the focus of our second 5 years, and it sits in another larger watershed, the Juniata. This is around 8,000 square kilometers. And so we're saying, we make a subtle hypothesis here that by understanding coupled phenomena at these finer scales, that there is the prospect to scale up the process. It's not necessarily that it's not going to be different at new places, but we want to scale by the processes. All right, so one of the things we've been developing through the CZO, but also through EPA grants, NOAA grants, NASA, and others have helped to do this, is an integrated model at a special scale, because if you look at the climate models are very coarse scale. GCM is 100 kilometers across, or maybe 50, depends on what resolution they have. They aren't capturing a lot of the high order dynamics that we want to catch. So, and then on the other hand, there's microscale models that are looking at all the dynamics right down to centimeter scale, very much process oriented. But you can't really scale those up to first, second, third order streams. And so our strategy was to integrate over some finite volume. This is the unstructured grid we have in the model. But do the scaling up of the differential equations, the models that describe all these processes, in a way that captures this intermediate scale from hill slopes on up to second, third, even fourth order drainages. And I'll tell you more about that as we go along. So we have these processes with a land surface energy balance model in the code. So one of the applications of these catchment models is to downscale climate data and land use change. And that's always going to be a sub-theme in this whole thing, really. Okay, see if I can get, there we go. Okay, so just to give you an idea of the scale, this is a GCM grid. This is Tibet, the Tibetan Plateau. You see this very complex drainage network is described. So what we're aiming at is to resolve these subgrid processes that sit in first, second, and third order channels inside say a GCM grid, for example. It just gives you an idea. So we're focusing on a scale that many of the models haven't so far. They haven't looked at spatially distributed models that resolve hill slopes to third order streams and do it in a way that's computationally tractable. So I'll make that point to begin. So we resolve these upland water features in the model. Some of the equations, so this is background to my main talk. I want to set up the modeling side and the data side, and we'll get there quickly here. These are the processes that we have in PIM, and they're all fully coupled from the outset. So basically you have channel flow and overland flow are communicating, unsaturated flow, groundwater interception, snowmelt, evaporation. The idea is to build a multiphysics model where things talk focused at a particular scale. And then we've also more recently added transport, so we can look at how solutes and isotopes move through the catchment, coupled to the hydraulics, this is the hydraulic head here, in a way that we can solve the transport equations as well, and I'll tell you more about that as we go on. These are just to give you an idea of the kinds of equations we solve. All right, so when we started building PIM, the Penn State model, we realized very quickly that our models in catchment science and in environmental science are data intensive, meaning you need a lot of different data. And your data sits on as many as a dozen federal servers. So, and they're all in different formats. They're all in different states of access. Some are easy, sort of easy to get. Others are very complicated to get. But what it means is that every graduate student or every research project, you've got to reinvent the wheel, go back and try to find all the geospatial data you need to either run a model or run some code. And so what we did is we built something called Hydroter, and it's hydroter.psu.edu. That is a bundled service of the geospatial data that we call the essential terrestrial variables. That is those data, geospatial data and climate data that you need to run our model, or any other model in fact. And so you can see some of the things that are in the database. In this case we actually have land parcel data because the ag guys wanted to know, they want to do water, nitrogen, and other budgets at a farm scale. And so we we don't have this for the whole country yet, but this is just for Pennsylvania. We have the stream and lake, the national hydrographic data. We have the USDA Surgo data, the national land cover data, and we have the climate data, and these are some of the coverages that we have in the database. It's about 200 terabytes of data, and you need a very special kind of server to serve up on the web this kind of data, this scale. So it's a high performance computing data problem. So the model that is supported by access to national data. We also think that this creates a sort of a healthy tension between making the data available to the model and beginning to discuss what are the essential variables that we need for modeling either continentally or locally in small catchments. We need to begin to have a standardization or a data center or database that the community says, that's what I need. And so these essential terrestrial variables are meant to sort of create a conversation about what is the data sets we need for modeling, and we got to start standardizing this stuff. We've got to start making the USGS, the soils, the EPA, the NOAA, NASA stuff talk to each other in a way that we can use to solve real problems. And I think you can all kind of appreciate the idea. Okay, so one other product, data product, before I get into the heart of my talk, is something that's happened very well, unbeknownst to me for a long time, until the last year or so, was that the climate guys are simulating stable isotopes of oxygen-18 and deuterium in rainfall. And they're doing this at an hourly interval, and they do it in water vapor, total precipitable water, and in precipitation. And so basically this is part of what they call the reanalysis, climate reanalysis. And so this guy, Kei Yoshimura from the University of Tokyo, uses the SCRIPT spectral model, and they have been building this isotope product globally in their GCMs. And now he's actually downscaled it to 10-kilometer grid. And I'm going to just show you a slide with some of the data. This is the potential height. This is the oxygen-18 in total precipitable water. This is O18 in precip, and this is in relative humidity, specific humidity. So this is the vapor. And so this is the 10-kilometer, and I think this one is the GCM grid, a much coarser grid. But you see that that for this period, January 16 to 21, the ridges and valleys play a big role here. The Appalachians and down the Blue Ridge in this area, you're seeing a lot of variation. And here's we've compared their data. The blue is the simulated from the GCM or from the downscale, the mesoscale model for oxygen-18 and deuterium. The yellow is the Purdue water isotope website, and the red is our CZO, and you'll see that it does a pretty reasonable job of capturing the seasonality. When we compare storm-wise, it's not so good, but for the seasonality, it does a pretty good job. So this is a product that's on the horizon, giving us isotope data anywhere in the globe. So don't feel constrained when you have a project in Africa that you might be able to use this to do some tracing studies there. All right, so let me get into the main part of my talk. So the Susquehanna Shale Hills Observatory has been our focus. Give you a little background. This is the physiographic provinces and sections of Pennsylvania. Our site sits here in Center County. We're right on the edge of the Carbonate Valleys and the Ridge and Valley, and this is the Allegheny Plateau. We have the glaciated portion of the plateau and the unglaciated portion of the plateau, and then we get down here into Piedmont, and then there's a little bit of coastal plain here on the edge. Okay, so let's take a closer look at our site. This is a block diagram, not quite through where we are. State College is right about here, Penn State. We have limestone aquifers under the valley. And our site sits up on a ridge, and basically it sits right, the ridges are kind of funny here. They're sort of synclines in and of themselves. And our site sits right at that point. So we have very steeply dipping beds up on the ridge, and then the ridge actually is another valley that the streams run down. And that's what we'll look at here. Oh, sorry, I took one slide out. This is Shale Hills. It's only 10 hectares. It's small. This is a wintertime shot from Google Map. Overlay. This is the conifer, the hemlock forest, and these are oak hickory forests, and it's a very dense forest, as I think I have some photos later, but this is a wintertime photo. So you can see a very simple kind of watershed. It's shale. And the shale is very steeply dipping with residuum soils on top of the shale, and that's where the water storage is. There's not a whole lot of flow through the shale that we can tell so far. Okay, so what did we do for the last 5 years? We beat this place up. These are all observations, and they're not all sensors. The black dots are actually tree surveys. We did a XYZ biomass on all the trees, 2,500 trees. The forester did the study, and it's proving to be really valuable because we use the trees to locate our sensors, and nobody will do this again, I know. But when you turn ecologists loose on these things, they kind of go crazy. I mean, it's a very cool study anyway. All right, so then we have soil moisture tensiometer. We have a Cosmos, which is one of these new instruments that measure. It's right here, and it has a 300-meter footprint for soil moisture and for snow water equivalent. We have an eddy flux tower up here, and I'll get to the rest of the instrument. We have groundwater wells along the valley, and a set of several lysimeter nests that I'll point out in a minute. The lysimeter nests are sampled for water quality and also for the isotopes. Part of the reason reanalysis is so nice is that we can then take the modern record, calibrate our models over the CZO record, and then run the reanalysis over the watershed. Because it exists from 1979 for the present, we can build the history of the site hydrologically, and that turns out to be very important, as we'll see later. This is groundwater storage. This is the other one is soil moisture storage. This is recharge. This is transpiration, evaporation, and interception. This is the rainfall, and this is the calibrated and observed runoff for roughly from a 5 or 6 year period in the data set. I guess about a 6 or 7 year period. Okay, so what data do we have? NSF has been fantastic about adding new products to the CZO sites. This is a LiDAR image. We've got 3 LiDAR runs now, and we didn't know there was a braided stream right here because the vegetation is so thick. Until you extract the vegetation from the signal, you can't see that. You go out there, I defy people to, well, we didn't do the walking around because it's very hard to get through this area, but it's interesting the kind of features you see. So this is our grid. This is the soil survey. We had a high resolution soil survey done. This is the depth to bedrock map. And this is the land use when we start to group the trees. So there are patterns emerging from the 25 different tree species that sit in 10 hectares. We have a lot of diversity of forest in this thing. And then the hemlock forest is down in this area. So we've tried to use this in our model development. But I want to talk about the isotope network because that's the topic here. And the blue dots are observation wells where we've been collecting samples every week to 2 weeks by hand. We have a continuous ISCO recorder on the well here and another one here. This is the stream outlet. We have an ISCO on that we sample daily. We have a rain sampler that samples every 6 hours during a storm, automatically opens, grabs a sample, and builds that precipitation water sample. And we run the isotopes on all of this data. There are 4 lysimeter transects from ridge to valley, and I'm going to show you some data from those as well. So here's some of the instrumentation. This has 9 6-hour samples in this manifold. It's a very nice German product, very expensive German product. These are the standard ISCO samplers, and we put one of these on our wells as well. There's the lysimeters. So they're suction lysimeters, and they extract water samples at multiple depths over the soil horizon in 4 transects. And the team, the geochemistry team installed these, and we piggybacked to grab samples from them. We use the Los Gatos laser isotope machine that measures isotopes, and we can run about 40 or 50 samples a day, so it's very efficient that way. But we have to take a sample back. I understand that at Andrews they have them in the field. I think they do. Okay, so what do we do with, how do we understand this isotope strategy? One of the things that you can look at precipitation history for oxygen 18 over the course of the year, and you see a seasonal cycle. Very strong in the seasonal cycle. But you also see a lot of other processes, and this is from John Gibson at the University of Waterloo, where this is the meteoric line, or the relationship between deuterium and oxygen 18, and we see that the winter samples should be out in this part of the curve, summer up here, You have an arid vapor source, or you could get an idea of the departure from this line depending on the source of where the storms come from. Tropical storms have a different signal than the west coast, east to west air flows. And then cooler, high latitude, high altitude, inland, warmer, low altitude, low coastal sites. And so distance from the coast changes the isotopic signature. The isotopic signature in each of the pools, soil water, groundwater, stream water, and precipitation, are what we're trying to nail down. And the ecology community has labeled that as an isoscape. You're trying to map in space and time and model, as we'll see, what is the isoscape in this catchment. That's what we're trying to do. So here's our data. In 4 years, we've collected almost 7,000 samples now. You can see the blue is the precipitation, deuterium, oxygen 18. These are isotopes of water. And we're trying to understand how these things move through the system and see if we can begin to understand the time it takes for water to move from rainfall to storage to runoff. If you look at this orange, that's the rain, that's the soil moisture data, and it underlies all this other stuff. The groundwater is the green. The red is the stream, and actually the red underlies this too, but the red you're seeing is the runoff during tropical storms only. The groundwater and the stream flow are almost the same distribution-wise, but the tropical storms, that all comes from winter snowmelt, basically, or winter precipitation. The tropical storms happen in September, in October, November. They produce this divergence in the slightly different than groundwater otherwise. Okay, so that's a bit of the story. Here's a statistical relationship of the wet and dry season, or the growing season, and the winter, what we call the recharge as a groundwater person. So we see these profiles. This is the precipitation this is oxygen 18, and this is the dry season curve with a standard deviation shown. This is the wet season, wintertime. This is the deuterium, has a very similar cycle, or similar pattern. It looks like a thermal profile. But also notice that by the time you get down to about 1 meter, the seasonal cycle is about gone. And so again, it does look like a thermal signal, which is really what it should be. This is the range of precipitation at both sites in terms of oxygen 18 and deuterium. So that's the rain that's coming in. And so you see these nice profiles. Now, if I looked at one snapshot in one time, I don't get this nice curve. This is a statistical relationship. So you need to average over seasons in order to glean this. There's so much noise in the soil moisture variations and in the isotope as well that these things don't emerge until you do that. So just to show you that, let me say that seasonal profiles show strong isotopic attenuation with depth. Seasonal differences in standard deviation suggest a thermally dominated profile or seasonally dominated infiltration into the soil. So then we compared north and south slopes in much the same way, and we get more or less the same thing. This is a north slope. Oh, yeah, I didn't mention, I'm plotting here also, or this is from all of this soil moisture stuff in isotope is from Evan Thomas's defense, which he just defended a couple weeks ago. This is the groundwater. Basically, if we look at the average of all the groundwater data we have, the lower part of the soil moisture looks just like groundwater. And again, we get this profile. You start to see some excursions on the north slope that you don't quite see on the south side. And so the south side is actually north facing. And so it is, there seems to be more sublimation on that side. As a matter of fact, there's a picture after the sun has got a light snowfall on this side, and it's gone already on that side. So we tend to have snow hanging out, and more melt and maybe evaporation as well, but and more active loss of the snow on this side, just due to the thermal aspect relationship. Okay, so on the north, the snowpack melts and infiltrates into the shallow soil. On the south slope, the snowpack remains, and we think that there's a bigger chance that we're sublimating quite a bit of the pack. Well, this is a novel way that Evan figured out to look at the different pools that we sample. And this basically is a histogram that's symmetric, so don't worry, the left is the same as right, but you can see the differences with this kind of plot kind of nicely. This is all the soil profile data lumped into one histogram for oxygen-18 and deuterium. This is the shallow soil down to around 15 to 20 centimeters. It looks a little bit different. It's a little more peaked. Then the intermediate depth soil water, 20 to 30. And then when we get the deeper par 40, 50, and then we get to the stream water, and then we get to groundwater. And look what's happened to groundwater. It basically is becoming a spike. It's really collapsing the distribution of the signal, and we have a lot of data. We have 1,500 samples to look at this for, and then two isotopes. So the groundwater basically is also showing this extreme attenuation in the data. And so then if you look at the fraction, the relative variance ratio between the hydrologic pool and precipitation, we see that the soil water is around 12% for oxygen or deuterium, 15% for oxygen-18, down to groundwater, which is 0.003 and 0.007, or a fraction of 1% of the variance of the precip. So the variability goes away quick. All right, so now I want to turn to the theory side. So one of the things we've been doing, I did a sabbatical with Mark Parlange, and John Selker and I overlapped a bit while we were there, and what a great place for a sabbatical, and I'd say, but also they had these great visitors. And so I don't know if you were there, John, when the guys from Liege came, the oceanography guys. Were you there still?
No.
Okay, yeah, well, yeah, it was shortly after you left then. And so they have come up with this idea of using it's sort of a trick, you might say, of standard transport theory to directly simulate a model for age of water from the transport model. And I'll show you how they did it in a second. But their application was aging ocean currents. How long does the water stay in residence as it moves through an ocean current, wherever they were, and coastal margins and things like that as well. So let me try to motivate this a little. So the interpretation of age is complicated. It depends on the tracer, in this case stable isotopes oxygen-18 and deuterium, or chemical species, reaction kinetics, and I want to emphasize the flow regime. Most of the strategies for getting a residence time distribution have a steady state flow. I'm going to argue, or I hope show you, that may not be a good assumption. So the assumptions are typically steady flow is generally used, that we require an explicit form of the age or transit time distribution function. We don't make any assumptions about that distribution. We predict it, in fact. And advection is the main transport process. We're going to relax that assumption too. Advection, diffusion, dispersion, all these transport phenomena play the game, and that's what we would like to build into this model. You can look at a paper in Hydrologic Processes in 2010 that shows most of this. Okay, we relax these assumptions. Let's, here's some of the players. And I didn't get, there's many more, and some folks right here that have been using this stuff, but I want to point out this guy Delez and Georgiou. Those are the ocean guys who came up with this idea about how to do direct age simulation. All right, so let's think about what age is. So if I'm thinking about a groundwater problem, I got some location in space, I've got a input rate of flow, and I've got some concentration, whatever it happens to be, a tracer. I'm going to use oxygen-18 and deuterium, but you could use something else. And that over time, I sample this in an Eulerian framework, a fixed coordinate system, and I'm measuring my concentration and the flow rate at that point, but it's changing. The flow is dynamic, so the paths are slightly different between those points. And in fact, if you think about this as a joint distribution, think of it as the age distribution. That's a function of time, of age, and I'll define that in just a minute, and some parameter, say the location. You could get a two-dimensional probability density where the randomness is in time and in tau, or age, but we don't know what it is. We only know at this point that I'm saying it exists, and I can use it then to calculate the moments. And what's the probability? If this is a probability, then we know how to calculate moments. This is the nth moment for this distribution. And if I look at the 0th moment, we know from our analogy to transport processes, this is the concentration. The area under the curve is the concentration here. The first moment is something that you might, it's just the first moment, but they tend to call it the age concentration. And what Deleuze and those guys figured out was if you take their ratio, you get the age as a theoretical construct from the moments. All right, so that still doesn't solve the problem. This was pretty well known. I mean, this was known. What Deleuze then did is use these moment equations in classical transport theory. But I got to motivate that too. And this goes back to population biology. So think about these particles as having a certain mass that I describe by the time rate of change of mass in my control volume. This simple engineering problem. Now, let's also assume that we keep track of the age of those particles, not just the mass. When did they come into the system, a birth, and when did they leave, a death? That's the population biology analogy. And so that means you should keep track of the time derivative, the tau derivative, the age derivative of mass in the same volume. And this then becomes a total derivative in time and tau. And so if I write that in terms of my age distribution, I would have two derivatives, both really time variables. One of them, though, is sort of relative time for when the particle came into the volume. This is my sources and sinks, and this is whatever transport operator I'm going to use, L. And L could be an advection dispersion equation or a lump parameter model. I'm going to use this example, although we've solved it for this too. So the idea then is I've got a transport theory that keeps track of age and time and potentially space, and now I want to do something with it. So what I'm going to do is integrate this equation relative to the moments, find the 0th moment as my concentration equation, integrate it one more time, and I get the age. And so I can do it for all moments. I can write this transport theory for every moment. Instead of writing it in terms of the distribution, I write it in terms of the moment. There are coupling terms. There's the operator. There's the n-1 moment, so there's coupling between moments. And so there's, and there's my equation. Remember, I need only 2 moments here. I need 0 and 1 to do this. And so let's do this for a lump system. So 0 is here, but I'm also going to this is a simple watershed model. Change in storage is inflow minus outflow. Simple as we could get. The concentration with a little manipulation looks like this. Here's my sources and sinks of tracer. This is my concentration dynamic equation. This is my watershed volume of storage equation, let's say. But I can also solve for this first moment, and then I can, and notice with my first moment, there are no new parameters. I still have Q over V. Alpha is I don't know what alpha is other than it's the first moment. But when I take the ratio of alpha to the first moment to the 0th moment, I get the age for nothing. So that says adding one more equation that's one-way coupled to the concentration equation, I solve the whole problem and I get age as a result. So that's what Deleuze figured out, and that's what we're using here. So just to give you a solution, imagine that we had a unit input. I is 1 and Q is 1 for rainfall and rainfall concentration. We start at initial condition of 0. The flow is the red line. It goes up to its steady state value, 1. The concentration is, the residence time is a little longer, so it takes a while to get there, but it gets to 1. The age is simulated, and this is an analytic solution, by the way, that you can get in the HP paper. You see that the age is changing from 0 on up to a finite value, which you'll recognize as the residence time. The steady state volume of the system over the flow through the system, the input. So that's a theoretical result that says, as long as my hydrology is active, I get a constant asymptote here. This is, the residence time is a good number, but it was less than that through this developing time. So you got a clue now that age is time variable. Constant inputs have a finite age at large time. That's the conclusion. All right, so now let's look at what happens when I shut that pulse off. Same experiment, but at time 4, I say, okay, no more inputs. I let the system relax. The concentration goes up, hits a constant, and whatever's there, it can't change anymore because we're not adding any more tracer. But look what happens to the age. It gets to that point, and it goes up like a clock. So when the hydrology stops, you have clock time. So all you're doing is aging the particles that are left by a clock. So this gives you a clue that during the dry season, when the hydrology slows down, the tracer is going to be older, become older, approaching clock time. When you have a lot of active hydrology, the same thing speeds up and goes to a finite value where the maximum would be the residence time. So in fact, the residence time is a maximum in a sense, if you want to think of it that way. So when I saw that, and that's an analytic solution. So I was really surprised. I'd never thought of it like that, but it seems plausible. Okay, so then you put in a random input for flow. The red is the flow, black is the concentration, and there's the age. So what's age doing? It's responding to the tracer, these big slow variations in the tracer. You can kind of see that here, but it's also responding to the hydrology. So the hydrology is driving the system, and the age is all over the place. And so it's a function of two variables now, the concentration and the flow. Steady state flow in these upland catchments is not a good assumption. It's quite clear. So you can see why, in this case, the simple model gives you some idea about how the system is aging. Okay, so in general, the age of tracer accelerates or slows depending on the system flow dynamics and the source history of the tracer. So we got a two-component problem now. All right, so we did some simple models for mobile, immobile flow. There's been a lot of discussion about these ideas where the matrix here stores the water, the macropores or something like that lets the water move, sort of dead zone storage, if you like. And so I built this simple model. Same idea where I let the volume of the macropore flow have this equation, the concentration in macropores, and then the immobile is just only exchanges with the macropore flow. So it's a simple model. And then I can get my first moments, take their ratio, and you get some results that say, for the steady constant input, this is my unit input again, that the mobile water is much younger than immobile water, and the difference between these two is the rate constant that I put in the model. So basically, this is a very predictable thing, but it's time variable. And in fact, we get the same kind of result for mobile, immobile. So if you have the dry and wet season, this would be the cycle that you would go through. So the hydrology speeds up, the immobile water is growing here, and then it takes off like a clock. Same with the mobile. But now we're talking about a two-component mixing idea. Okay, so this would just be the same model, flow, mobile, immobile concentration, and this would be the ages, the age of the mobile water, the age of the immobile water for a random input, so time variable. So, and it looks a lot like the last one. The other thing that you can do is predict the distribution from this simulation, and here it is. So this is a pure prediction. We actually take the simulated results of that last experiment, and we see that the mobile mean value is around 4. The immobile has an age of around 14 or so, something like that. So you see clear partitioning, and I wouldn't say that that's Gaussian, gamma, normal. It's none of those, really. And now it might get normal out here. It's a little, I don't know, that doesn't look too normal to me, but.
Are those days, years?
It's relative time, yeah. This is a cartoon. But it is a numerical experiment, and I wasn't paying attention to the field data in this example. I was just trying to show, so think of them as years, let's say. Yeah, it could easily be years, depending on the overall residence time. So the point is that we can actually predict what the residence time distribution is if you need to. Okay, so now let's go back to PIM, and we did the same thing for the distributed model. And so Gopal Bhatt has now just finished his dissertation last fall, where he has extended this to an integrated model, so each of these storage reservoirs can also have a transport model and also be able to predict the age. And we did this at Shale Hills, so I want to show you that. Okay, so we went through some calibrations. This is the observed and predicted runoff. There's still some things we've got to fix on this. This is a kind of a rough and ready calibration. This was the simulated and observed evapotranspiration. You know, it captures the trends right, but there's a lot of variation. But again, this was a very early calibration. And even the isotope data that we have, this is deuterium. It's a normalized deuterium. No, it isn't actually. The rainfall is the blue, the black is the simulated, and the red is the observed. It doesn't do that good a job. We didn't tune the parameters, we just took off-the-shelf parameters to see. It captures a little of the seasonal cycle, but I'll show you the results we get, because this is what this is like a 4-year average residence time as a function of space. So the average age of everything is 217 days. But you can see that in the watershed you've got spots where it's up to 400 days, the brown, or as little as 85 days. And what causes that spatial variability? The land cover, the soil, hydraulic properties, the slope, the hydraulic properties of the subsurface, the groundwater, all of those things interact. If everything was like the global climate models, a one elevation, one value for the whole grid block, we would have just one value, there'd be no spatial variability. But we see here a lot of spatial variability. I'm not saying that this is what this number is about right, we think. About 200 days is about the mean residence time. But we still got a lot of work to do to make sure that we're getting the right numbers here. So then you can look at time variation. So here's January through March. And we see there's about a lag time of 200 some days between the dry season when things are slow and the wet season when things speed up. And so here we are in January, through March, and it's still pretty fast. Well, yeah, it is. Yeah, that's right. So you're seeing a lot of higher numbers here. And here we are in April through June. We're sort of in a transition. And here we are in July through September. Now things are this is still giving you the spring effect. And again, here we are after the fall thunderstorm season when the tropical storms come through, and we get around the same in these two times. Spring and fall seem to be about the same. So I don't know if these are right. This is what the theory says, and we've got a lot more work to do to make sure this happens, but we're intrigued about the notion. Is this due, but I have one more plot that I want to show you, and I'm getting towards the end here. This is the reanalysis, 79 to 210. And so we took the reanalysis data and corrected a little bit by our CZO data that we could check it with. And so then we looked, this is the precipitation? Yeah, this is precipitation. You see the seasonality. Every year the isotope goes up and down in a sort of random, seasonal way, but there's a lot of randomness too. And then we average that, and here's the interannual. This is the annual average, so you're getting an idea of interannual variations in the age. The gray is the age of the high frequency data, okay? So there's a lot of variability in that. And so notice one thing. Does anybody notice anything about the interannual plot between 79 and 210? Slight increase. There's a little trend here. Okay, so the empirical evidence I have to explain that is in 1979 when the foresters were doing the forest studies here, they said that this watershed was a perennial stream, that it almost never dried up while they were working there over a course of a 10-year period. Now, I don't know if that was just a wetter period or not, but what's happening now is it dries up in June and doesn't get wet again till sometimes well into September. So it's got a long dry season. All right, so the explanations for why, and I don't even know if this is right yet. We haven't had this is just what you get from the model, and now you got to figure out if you got anything. But empirically, we had a perennial stream here and ephemeral stream here. The difference, I think, is the difference in the age of the forest and its water use. We had a nice conversation with John earlier that maybe that's in question, and I'm going to think hard about that, because we know that the stream's ephemeral now, and I think if we looked at the precipitation, we wouldn't see too much difference from year to year. We think the difference is the trees are actually using more water, and this is well, it's one explanation. So there should be probably a counter hypothesis to this. All right, so conclusions. The residence time at Shale Hill is a dynamic process with strong annual and interannual variability. The residence time appears to be, I should say, increasing over the reanalysis period. The watershed ET may also be increasing, not is, I'm being a little too strong there. The stream has become ephemeral since 1979. We think that's good data. And qualitative data, and then the forest may be aging and using more water. The trees were about 50 years old in 1979, so now they're about 80 years old, and probably at their peak in terms of water use, according to some foresters. So, is it true? I don't know. Is biology driving hydrology at long time scales? And I should have said long time scales, because obviously at shorter time scales it's a different story. And I have one other quick set of conclusions has to do with the theory. The mean age of water can be simulated directly with transport theory. Steady flow assumption is not necessary or even desired. The particular form of the age or residence time distribution is not always necessary. I mean, not to say you can't do it, but this provides an alternative. And watershed flow dynamics has major influence on age dynamics of the tracer. And this will change for different tracers. What are the implications for environmental observatories? I hope they're useful, and thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, we have time for some questions. Open the floor.
Yes?
It looked like when you're showing the isotope versus soil profile plots, that there was big discontinuities maybe with transitions between soil varieties.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we do see that, and in particular you see that in the cold season. That's one, we just have a paper in the Vadozone Journal on that. We think that, this macropore idea, when you've got to fill up the water in the matrix before it starts to move, is going on there. So the A, the B, and the C horizon all have different response. You'll also notice that the variation in the isotope is larger during that wet side than it is when the flow is going out of the system. It just doesn't see those excursions as much as in the winter when you've got a lot of melt going on and things like that. So we think macropores may be a part of that story.
Well, I think that was sort of my part. I was interested in, of all places on Earth, you've got a three-dimensional picture of how this watershed is functioning. I'm just interested how you're thinking about residence time distributed as a three-dimensional aspect.
Yeah, okay. So Ward Sanford, he does this kind of stuff with the USGS model by an inverse method. So they use mod path. They get the flow field and then back it out. That's studying only the advective time. The other thing that's not in mod flow in the general model is what's happening at the land surface. The land surface is doing a lot of work for us in terms of spatially distributed transpiration, evaporation, infiltration this way, slope, the soil hydraulic properties. The spatial variability we see is due to the land surface phenomena and some things in the soil too. So, when I showed this to Ward said, well, when I do that model, one layer model with, I get all the residence times are uniform across the whole watershed. And I says, yeah, that's what you get if you take all the land surface out. So you don't get any spatial structure if you just have a single recharge rate for the whole watershed. You get an absolutely uniform structure, and so you need those processes of surface flow, reinfiltration. The texture, the topography in the watershed is a critical factor here. So I'm arguing that the spatially distributed models really are the only way you're going to see those kinds of patterns. And now the second part of the question maybe is, are they real? And I think so, but I think there's variability because we see it. If you look at things like recharge with the land surface model and coupled to PIM, we see similar kinds of patterns. And it seems to be just simple water budgets, local water budgets where things are going out and going in at different rates because the soils are different or the vegetation is different or the slope is different. And so this just emerges right out of the story. So I don't know if it's right. I think it's plausible. Yeah. Richard?
Yeah, Chris, that was great. Your eddy covariance system is on top of the hill.
Yep.
there. Do you think it's capturing the above canopy? I can't remember how high up.
It's above the canopy, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so we were really wondering if we should put one in there, because the Meteo guys said, don't bother. It's rough topography.
It's not very flat terrain.
It's not so flat. And okay, but you know what we found out was that it serves as a fantastic constraint. We're calibrating our model on the eddy flux tower, stream flow, groundwater levels, and soil moisture. And when you constrain your model with that many state variables, it helps. And before we used the eddy flux, we couldn't separate transpiration from evaporation. We got the net right, but we feel, we got a couple papers coming out shortly that'll address this in some better detail. We feel that added to being able to get a better handle on the partitioning of transpiration and evaporation from the watershed as one additional state variable, a constraint.
So have you been running that long enough that you're seeing any trends in relative to like reference ET over the season or something like that?
No, and that's the other thing is we've had it in for 2.5 years or so. And but we did have some technical troubles. That lightning hit it a couple times, so there's been some big gaps. So I would say we're still the story's still out a little bit on it. But but the other thing is we find it correlates very nicely with reanalysis. So when we look at the energy we get from our machine, our instrument, compare it to NAR, the predicted climate reanalysis, it really does a pretty good job. So that's one. Yes. Yep. Very brief. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Roy.
Chris, could we go back to the equation?
Absolutely.
Estimated mean age, please? I just want to make sure that I understand one equation that you showed.
Yeah. Let's go all the way back, right?
No. Okay.
You want to go back to the original ones?
Okay.
This one? Okay.
Yeah, so this is for estimating the mean age of the water.
Yep.
But it seems to me that this equation is steady state for flow and is...
No. Absolutely. So let me show you the graph.
Yeah.
So the initial condition is volume 0. So the volume here goes up to, I'm just putting a unit input. This is a numerical experiment, right? So it's not steady. It's absolutely transient for that period. And then the tracer is also transient. And then the age is also transient. So basically, they're all dynamic. So I didn't make that point very clear. This formulation allows you to have unsteady flow and transport and age. So it's and that turns out to be critical. The time dynamics of the flow is speeding up the system and slowing it down in a way that changes the residence time or the transit time or the age. So the age is basically, just to explain what age is the average age of particles in the volume. Residence time is the average age of particles leaving the volume. So that's in the stream. So this is age that I'm looking at. This is the average age within the system. So it's definitely transient, and there's the time trace. Here's the time trace for concentration, and here's the time trace for age. And
I wasn't sure about that.
okay, sure. Roy.
Water age is one of those concepts that makes a scientist feel bad about themselves. Because it seems like you ought to understand it.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that your system, or one of the interesting things about the way you've done it is that you don't have to focus only on advection, or you don't have to require only advection. The tricky thing about dispersion and diffusion with age, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this, is that when you have real dispersion or diffusion in the system, water molecules cross boundaries multiple times.
That's right.
And I'm guessing, tell me if you're right, or tell me if I'm right, that you don't allow water to cross your boundary more than one time.
In this model, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's basically, it's a lumped model, but in the PIM model, it crosses every boundary.
Yeah, so good. So how do you how do you think about age of something where something can go in and out and in and out?
See, if you're trying to do the inverse problem and back this out the way ModPath does it, you can't do it. It's going to be technically impossible. So if you have water that's in the in mod flow, for example, and the water table drops and you leave water behind in the unsaturated zone, that's out of your equation. And that's not going to age in the same way as what's flowing in the model. But in a coupled model, you're actually keeping track of mass and the time that it went into the soil and went out of the soil. It doesn't matter. A fully coupled model lets it pass through all of those interfaces. The water table is one, so it can go in or out, back into the soil or back into the groundwater, depending on what the water table is doing or what recharge is doing. It can go into the stream and back out of the stream. It's a transport process. So all of those equations are actually done in PIM now, in the transport.
So you just, I guess it maybe part of this is just a question of definitions, but you just count the age when it's inside of some zone and not count if it's, say it's in the atmosphere or...
I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't say that clear. So age in my definition is the time it enters the system as rainfall.
Yeah.
That's it. And then the residence time is the time when it leaves out of my model domain, which is through a stream or groundwater.
Right.
And it can't come back at that point.
Yeah, there are lots of systems where, I mean, I was just wondering if any thoughts on this, where something can go out and in and out and in at a boundary.
So in terms of the stream, it can do it.
Yeah.
It's just that we have a domain that we're going to solve for.
You just make sure that your boundaries...
You make it big enough that you have your whole watershed that you're interested in. And so it's relative to those physical boundaries in the model. But going in and out of banks of streams, we see that it does it.
Different parts of the same system.
Yep.
But if you can go in and out of your box, things get...
Well, yeah, you lose. If it's not in your model domain, then you're cooked. But the ocean guys had that trouble too, because they would have eddies, and they didn't have the eddies in their model. And so then you'd have aging water circulating on the edge of the main currents. And so the only way to do that is to couple it. You've got to simulate the whole thing.
You got to simulate the whole thing.
You got to simulate the whole thing. You got to simulate it with coupled equations. So
that might be the key statement. If you really have, if you've got something going in and out of your model domain, it means you've got the wrong model domain.
You've got the wrong model domain and the wrong processes maybe too. So that's where the integrated model really can start to play an interesting role. Is that question, because heretofore we haven't been able to resolve that. Any other?
All right, let's continue this nice discussion downstairs, and thank
Excellent.